At 3 in the morning, the soft hum of my brand new fridge was lulling me to sleep like a metallic lullaby. Finally, after weeks of saving every penny from my recent promotion, I'd finally gotten rid of that avocado green dinosaur my parents left me when I moved out. The old fridge made a noise that sounded like a jackhammer trying to chew on rocks, and it leaked enough water to create a small pond in the kitchen. The new one was amazing. Silver, quiet, and super spacious. The night before, I spent hours obsessively arranging every shelf. Yogurts lined up like little soldiers, fresh veggies neatly tucked away in clear drawers, and I even bought those pretty water bottles you always see in home magazines. I know it sounds silly, but it meant a lot to me. At 32, with my first home, and now an appliance that didn't look like it came out of a 70s museum. Small wins that really made me feel like an adult. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. Deep sleep didn't last long. A loud crash from the kitchen yanked me out of bed. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my phone in the dark. It was 3:40 a.m. Another noise, this time more distinct, was something being dragged across the ceramic floor. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd stashed under my bed ever since I moved to this suburban neighborhood 6 months ago. People said it was a quiet place where everyone knew each other, but right then, the only thought running through my head was that someone had broken in. I tiptoed down the dark hallway, cold sweat dripping down my forehead. When I reached the kitchen door, I froze at the scene in front of me. A woman with perfectly cut blonde hair wearing workout clothes at 4 a.m. was dragging my new fridge toward the back door. "Karen? What the heck are you doing?" I shouted, instantly recognizing my neighbor from across the street. She turned around as nonchalantly as someone caught borrowing a cup of sugar. "Oh, hey dear. I thought you wouldn't mind. My fridge broke and I saw that this one got delivered yesterday. You're young. You can wait for the next delivery." I was stunned for a few seconds, trying to process how absurd this was. Karen, the 57-year-old woman who'd already made comments about my foreign accent, I was born and raised in Chicago, and even asked if I really owned the place when I moved in, was stealing my fridge. The same Karen who organized neighborhood meetings and handed out flyers about keeping the neighborhood's character. "You're breaking into my house, Karen. Drop that right now or I'm calling the cops." My voice came out firmer than I expected. Her face changed completely. That fake smile disappeared, replaced by a hard, cold look. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm just borrowing it. And put that bat down. Are you threatening me?" That's when I realized I was still holding the bat, although lowered. "I'm not threatening anyone. You broke into my house at 4 a.m. and you're trying to take my fridge. Please, just leave." Instead of backing off, Karen pulled her phone from her pocket. "Officer, please come quick. I'm at the new neighbor's house. That weird guy who just moved in. He's threatening me with a baseball bat. Yes, I'm scared for my life. He seems really aggressive." My stomach sank as she spun an entire story over the phone, casting herself as the victim. I tried to interrupt. "Karen, this is insane. You were..." She held up her hand to stop me. "The attacker is getting more violent. Please hurry." Then she hung up and gave me a confident smile. "Now put that bat on the floor, or it'll be worse for you when they get here." 15 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up in front of my house, their lights flashing quietly. Officers Jessica and Mike arrived. She was young and visibly tense, and he had that calm look of someone who'd seen it all. "He attacked me when I came to ask for some milk," Karen sobbed theatrically to Officer Jessica, who was leading her into the living room. "I never thought our neighborhood could get so dangerous." "Sir, I need you to step back and tell me your side of the story," said Officer Mike, positioning himself between us. "She was stealing my fridge," I explained, pointing at the appliance that was still partly out of place. "I was woken by all the noise. She broke into my house in the middle of the night." "A fridge?" Officer Jessica looked skeptical. "Ms. Thompson, what do you have to say about this?" Karen wiped away tears that weren't even there. "Ridiculous. I came asking for milk for my sick grandson. He got aggressive as soon as he saw me." "Officer," I insisted, "look at the fridge. It's out of place, with marks on the floor from dragging. And why on earth would she need milk at 4 in the morning?" Officer Mike examined the kitchen slowly, noticing the marks on the floor, the slightly open back door, and the outlet bracket that was partly pulled from the wall. He gave Karen a piercing look. "Ms. Thompson, something isn't right here. These marks on the floor are fresh, and the fridge was clearly moved." He walked over to the back door. "And I see a hand truck outside. Did you bring equipment to move a big appliance while you were out getting, what? Milk?" For a split second, Karen's face hardened before that victim mask fell back into place. You can't be suggesting that I, a respected resident of this neighborhood for 20 years, would try to steal something? Just ask anyone around here about my character. Officer Jessica, who until then had seemed inclined to believe Karen, began to look at the scene even more closely. Ms. Thompson, we need to take a look inside your house. If what you're saying about your sick grandson needing milk is true. Absolutely not. That's an invasion of my privacy. Karen abruptly got agitated and stood up. My lawyer is going to love hearing how you're treating an upstanding citizen just based on someone's word who we barely know. Officer Mike didn't back down. Ma'am, we're investigating conflicting reports. Refusing to cooperate is only going to raise more questions. While they talked, I noticed something odd on Karen's wrist. A bracelet that looked exactly like the one my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had reported missing at last week's community breakfast. I quietly mentioned it to Officer Mike. That bracelet has been mine for years, Karen blurted out quickly, covering her wrist. Curious, Officer Mike remarked, because Mrs. Rodriguez described a piece exactly the same, with that blue gem in the center and a custom clasp. The tension in the air was almost tangible. After more back and forth, Karen finally agreed to let them inspect her house, saying it would prove her innocence. Accompanied by a third officer who had just arrived, they headed over to her place across the street. Karen's house was immaculate, a model home that no one really lives in. While the officers checked the guest room where her sick grandson was supposed to be, it was completely empty. I noticed Officer Mike eyeing something odd in her basement. Ms. Thompson, that shelf looks oddly out of place with the rest of the decor, he commented, pointing at a heavy bookshelf that was slightly shifted from the wall. It's just an old shelf. I don't have time for renovations, Karen replied curtly. Officer Mike moved a few books and pressed the side of the shelf. To my shock, it slid aside smoothly, revealing a small hidden door in the wall. This is illegal! You don't have a permit for this! Karen tried to wedge herself between the officer and the opening, but Officer Jessica gently pushed her aside. Ma'am, you just gave us permission to search your house. If you really have nothing to hide. The secret compartment turned out to be a little makeshift office with 3 neatly organized file drawers, an old computer, and a leather-bound diary. The officers, now visibly tense, began poring over the documents. This is an insurance policy in the name of Ms. Geller from Elm Street, Officer Mike muttered, flipping through a folder. And here are receipts for online sales of items that match exactly those reported stolen last year over on the west side. Officer Jessica opened the diary and her face went pale. Mike, you need to see this. The diary had detailed entries about every neighbor, loaded with nasty comments about their ethnic backgrounds, sexual orientations, and personal quirks. Even more disturbing, it meticulously noted the items that Karen had collected from each home over the past 15 years, including notes on the best times to break in when the owners were away. Karen sat in deadly silence as the officers documented what they found. In a locked drawer at the back, they discovered jewelry that matched descriptions of items reported stolen, like the complete set of pearls Mrs. Jensen said disappeared after her husband's funeral 3 years ago. The neighbors' stories are starting to add up, Officer Mike commented. All those mysterious disappearances of small but valuable objects over the years, always brushed off as forgetfulness or carelessness. Officer Jessica uncovered something even more damning. Fraudulent insurance documents. Karen had filed false claims in the names of elderly or non-English speaking neighbors, redirecting the funds to temporary accounts before quickly shutting them down. Karen Thompson, you're under arrest for attempted theft today, and potentially for dozens of other crimes, announced Officer Mike, as he recited her rights and handcuffed her. The investigators have a lot of work ahead of them. Karen, with no more pretense of innocence, glared at me with a visceral hatred. You ruined everything. 20 years of building a respectable reputation in this neighborhood, and some newbie comes along and destroys my life's work. Your work was stealing and deceiving your neighbors. I shot back, feeling a mix of relief and sadness for our community that had suffered for so long. As they let her out, I noticed several neighbors had stepped out of their homes, drawn by the flashing police lights. Confused, sleepy faces watched the surreal sight of the president of the Homeowners Association being shoved into the back of a police car. What happened? Asked Mr. Wilson, a 70-year-old gentleman from the corner house. I took a deep breath before replying. I think we've got a lot to talk about as a community. Over the following weeks, our neighborhood went through an almost tangible transformation. With Karen in custody awaiting trial, stories began pouring in from all sides. the security system that mysteriously vanished from Dr. Patel's garage, the historical documents that went missing from Mrs. Martinez's collection, the family heirloom the Abernathy couple swore they lost during their move. The investigation revealed just how deep Karen's crimes ran. It wasn't just the occasional theft. It was a systematic, calculated scam that had been going on for over 15 years. She exploited her status as an old, respectable resident to get into people's homes, access personal info, and nab valuables. That diary, in particular, horrified everyone, not only for its detailed record of her thefts, but also for the deeply prejudiced comments about neighbors of different ethnic backgrounds. The police uncovered an elaborate insurance fraud scheme. Karen had faked documents in the names of elderly or non-English speakers, redirecting the funds to temporary accounts. Digging deeper, they found she'd raked in over $200,000 over the years through these tactics. One afternoon, as I was fixing the marks left on my kitchen floor by the wheels of the hand truck, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, the neighbor whose bracelet I had recognized on Karen's wrist. "I brought a cake," she said simply, handing over a covered plate. "It's chocolate with coffee, my specialty." I invited her in, and we sat down to enjoy the cake with some coffee at my kitchen table. My new fridge, now back in its proper place, hummed softly in the background. "You know, I always felt like something was missing in my house," Mrs. Rodriguez remarked as she carefully cut the cake. "Small things kept disappearing, and I thought maybe I was just being overlooked. Karen even once suggested I see a neurologist." She shook her head with a sad smile. Her manipulation was so subtle. That pattern kept repeating over the next few days. Neighbors I barely knew started dropping by with homemade dishes, bottles of wine, or just to chat. I realized that, for many, I had become an unintentional symbol, someone who challenged the farce that had ruled our neighborhood for so long. Karen's trial began 3 months later. I sat in the courtroom among dozens of neighbors as the prosecutor calmly presented piles of evidence. The jury didn't take long at all. They found her guilty on all counts: theft, breaking and entering, insurance fraud, document forgery, and more. The judge, a middle-aged woman with piercing eyes, read out the sentence: 8 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 5, plus financial restitution for all the victims. As the officers led her out, Karen kept up her stiff air of superiority, showing no trace of remorse. "I hope you're satisfied," she hissed at the group of neighbors as she was escorted out. "You've ruined the life of a woman who only wanted to keep the neighborhood respectable." Mr. Wilson, usually so kind and reserved, replied with surprising calm, "No, Karen, you confused respect with fear, and at last, we're free of it." The Saturday after the verdict, I got a text from Mrs. Rodriguez inviting me to a small get-together in her backyard. When I got there, I realized it wasn't small at all. Nearly the entire neighborhood was there, with folding tables set up on the lawn and a huge smoking barbecue. "It's our first neighborhood gathering without Karen running the show," explained Dr. Patel, handing me a cold beer. "We thought it was time to do something different." It was eye-opening to see everyone interacting without Karen's oppressive presence. Kids ran freely among yards without anyone complaining about the noise. Neighbors who'd never spoken before discovered they had a lot in common. Mrs. Chen, who'd been at the corner house for 5 years, revealed that she was a retired professional chef and even offered to give cooking classes to anyone interested. As the afternoon turned to evening and backyard lights lit up, casting a warm glow over the crowd, Mr. Wilson got everyone's attention by raising his glass. "I propose we make this a monthly tradition," he announced. "A community BBQ on the last weekend of every month, always in a different backyard, so we can actually get to know each other." Everyone cheered. Someone suggested starting a community garden in the empty lot next to the park. Another person proposed a skill swap, language classes in exchange for home repairs, or pet sitting for help with tech issues. The creative energy that had been suppressed for so long was finally breaking free. Walking home that night, I couldn't help but think about how my new fridge, such a mundane object, had somehow sparked a complete transformation in our lives. If Karen hadn't tried to steal it, her regime of manipulation might have continued for many more years. 6 months later, our neighborhood was almost unrecognizable. Not in the way the houses or gardens looked, those were all still there, but in the energy and connection among us. The monthly barbecues became a staple. The community garden thrived under rotating volunteers, and a group of teenagers even started helping the elderly with tech and daily chores. Karen's house stayed empty for a while, a silent reminder of all the secrets it had once held. Eventually, it was sold to a young family with 5-year-old twins. The community welcomed them warmly with homemade gifts and genuine offers to help with the move. Watching that old space change, dark walls being replaced with bright colors, a manicured garden giving way to a more natural yard with a swing set, I felt a kind of symbolic closure. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. On an especially hot afternoon, while I was helping set up the irrigation system in the community garden, Mrs. Rodriguez sat next to me during a water break. "You know what's more revealing?" she said, watching everyone work together. "Karen always said we needed her to keep order, to stop the neighborhood from falling apart. But look at us now. More united, more cooperative, and a lot happier." I nodded, watching kids from different families playing together, adults sharing tools and advice, and teenagers showing the elderly how to use gardening apps on their phones. "Sometimes, we all need a reminder," I replied, "that things aren't always what they seem, and that it's worth standing up for what's right, even when it feels impossible to convince folks." Later that night, as I opened my fridge to grab some ingredients for dinner, I smiled seeing it filled with labeled containers, leftovers from the last community dinner, Mrs. Chen's special sauce, fresh tomatoes from the shared garden. The appliance that once was just some coveted gadget had turned into a symbol of something much bigger. Not just my little personal win, but a tangible reminder of how a community can change when the truth comes out and prejudice is exposed. The biggest lesson I learned from that bizarre experience wasn't about being paranoid. It was about having courage. The courage to question the status quo, to stand up for what's right even when it's inconvenient, and to trust that communities can heal and evolve. Karen had banked on our silence, on our hesitance to confront someone respectable, to keep her in power. Her worst crime might not have been what she stole physically, but how she stole the genuine connection between neighbors for so long. Every time I see my fridge, I remember how ordinary things can end up sparking big changes. And sometimes, it takes someone trying to steal something valuable to show us what really matters. When fall came and the leaves started changing color, we celebrated our 6th community BBQ in the backyard of the new owners who had taken over Karen's old house. Seeing that space, once a monument to isolation and secrets, turned into a place of laughter and togetherness, felt like the perfect ending to our collective journey. And what about my fridge? It's still there, humming gently in the kitchen, doing its simple but important job. Every so often, when new neighbors move in and hear the story, they ask to see it, as if it were some local historical relic. I always show them with a smile, explaining that sometimes the most ordinary objects can have the most extraordinary impacts on our lives. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this.